Hey, Courtney, you have 9 of your committee members on, it looks like, so you have the majority if you want to go ahead and get started. He was actually here in my office with me.
Okay. So I think the purpose of the meeting is to look at these ambulance counts to kind of come up with some kind of consensus on are these accurate? Are these something that we can live with? I'm going to be I've never kind of held back. Maybe I should have, but and my concern was a couple of folks, and one of those, the biggest ones has been corrected. It just seems like some of the numbers were off. So what I'm going to do is just kind of walk down the list and just see if there's any that anybody's got some concerns about. Does that make sense?
Courtney,
Do you want her to, oh, go ahead, Pete, sorry.
I'm sorry. Could you define the criteria in order to register for this list? What's the basis for the measurement?
So the basis is that if it is a 911 zoned truck. So where I think we come into confusion is based on dedicated trucks versus services that run 911 calls, hospital transports, general transports, all of those. And how do you delineate those? And quite frankly, can you?
Okay, and then part two would be, what about backups or spares?
And great point. And I'm not so sure. And I've done a little bit of math here on some of the counties. And what is an appropriate number of backups and spares? I'm quite frankly, Emmanuel County's got 5 trucks. I don't run it anymore. I don't have a dog in the fight. And they've always put 5 trucks in. They staff 3 peak. So should we look at that as maybe that many 40% backup? Is that appropriate? Is that not appropriate? I don't know. And at the end of the day, quite frankly, we may not be able to come up with something we can completely figure out. It may be that there will always be some confusion to it. So, and that's the reason for the meeting, is to try to come up with, should we put some hard, fast rules down on it.
Courtney, what question was asked to the state to ask the providers?
Gabby, and if I say this wrong, y'all correct me. What I perceive is the way we asked the state was, how many of the 911 zone providers, how many ambulances do they have? Is that pretty much what has been asked of them?
Hey, Courtney, it's Katie. We asked Kelly to provide the 911 licensed trucks, and that's the count that she provides for us.
Okay. Now, so there are some things that, and she was not able to, she's on vacation, so she's not on the call today. But when we asked them for that, we have never said, what is your peak staffing? What is your backup? How many are general transport? In the past, when we've reached out to individual agencies that we have questioned, their response has been, well, if something happens, all of them are available for 911, and that's the way we look at it. And because we haven't had a hard and fast rule to separate that, then that's what we've done. Is that, do you understand now where we're at? So what I'd like to do is just walk down the list and there's some things that I still don't know the answer to. And well, let's pick on Walker County right now. So you got in Walker County, you got Walker County Fire with one truck. You got the hospital there that I think runs the county EMS has got 10. So is Walker County Fire a 911 zone provider? And I don't know.
To my understanding, Courtney, this is Scott from Region 1. To my understanding with Walker County, kind of like what Bartow and Metro are doing in Bartow County, they still hold, I guess Walker County still holds the ambulance license, but then they've contracted for the other to be the service provider, but they still have one truck that they're using in case they can staff if needed. So that's how because I've already called and asked that question, the exact same thing. How did they have that there? And I was told that they still hold the ambulance license and they still have one truck that is available that they can staff to use in emergency. And that's the only time they're using it, kind of like I think multiple other counties throughout the state. I think there's a few like that are doing that. So they still fill out an ambulance license. And by filling out that ambulance license enlisted, they have one truck, that's enlisting the state to say they have one ambulance that we see here and appears here. So now, I don't know if that's the way we're doing it or what, but when I look through a lot of these for Region 1 specifically and look at these numbers, a few of these, that is not the 911 truck services, truck numbers that they have available on a typical day to respond to emergency calls. Like I'll use Gilmer, for instance, where I was the director for 14 years, not any longer, but like them, they have 6 trucks, but only 3 on a good day, 4 of those trucks are ready to respond on a 911 emergency call. Those other 2 trucks are backup that are completely empty, bare bones, have nothing on them, have to take the equipment from another truck to put on that previously to make it a serviceable truck, if that makes sense. So they have 2 in reserve.
So Scott, and this is a little off point, but it's just a question because we had it in Richmond County, not Richmond County, in Jefferson County at one point. I don't know if it's still this way or not, but the county owns the license, so they had to keep an ambulance under their license so they could contract with somebody else, but they had to have that ambulance there just to meet the license requirement. Is that what's going on there?
Well, that's my understanding. That's what I understood. Now, I may be wrong.
Yeah. Okay.
So Courtney, this is Huey. Originally, that was the way the state required it. They have since changed that. We had the same scenario in Clark and Oconee. Both of those counties own the zone. I'm sorry, both of the hospitals own the zone. And so they contract with us to cover those 2 counties. In the beginning, the state required them to have an ambulance. But that changed probably 5 or 6 years ago, that they recognized that it didn't make sense for the zone holder, if they're contracting out, to have an ambulance. So that is no longer the case. I would think, y'all mentioned Walker County, and looking at this list, it looks like they have that ambulance as a mutual aid, and those have never been included. A mutual aid provider is not included only as its own provider.
But in the past, we've always let them be included in this, to my understanding.
Well, and that's where
that's what we're gonna change.
Yeah, that's if you go down the list. If you look now, Atlanta Fire Department's trying to do the same thing. I know they have Echo at the airport, but they don't run 10 ambulances at the airport.
Right.
So, this gets back to, we've had this discussion before about this money is allocated for EMS providers. And that's why we've always held our belief, that fire department gets their grant monies through the firefighter assistant grant, federal. This is the only revenue source from EMS. And if we start opening in that Pandora box, all this money is going to go away in a hurry.
Well, I don't disagree, and that's my question. I've never, I shouted out to Kelly the other day because I was a little concerned, a little confused about some of his service deliveries models, because I get the service delivery model that you have, Huey, in Clark County. That's, I get that. That's pretty straight up. But if county has a service delivery model and license of their own, then that gets a little bit more complex to me.
Well, I'll use in Region 3, looking at AMR for for Fulton and DeKalb, both listed. For DeKalb, they've added 17 trucks from 43 to 70 to 60. Are they really using 60 trucks to run a 911 service in DeKalb County?
Therein lies the question.
Well,
I mean, I don't know if they are or not. I have no idea.
I think what we need to define is whether or not spares or backups are included in the count. Because I think there's a lot of services here that are counting backups or spares, however you want to call it. Because it doesn't match their daily deployment, as you stated.
But we're going to have to cover some spares or backups, because I think that's a reasonable way to run a service, that you have some.
Right.
But depending on, again, I'm okay with a certain number of spares backup, because you're going to have maintenance, you're going to have unusual events, no doubt. And right now, if you try to get an engine, take a number. So the spares I'm okay with.
Okay.
But what frustrates me a little bit is if you're running general transport with 25% of their fleet, and we're putting that down as a 911. And I honestly don't know how to solve it.
Hey, Courtney.
Yes.
Hey, this is John Smith. Just FYI, we list 4 trucks in Jefferson. We have 1 in service at each station. There's 2 stations in Jefferson County, 1 in Rennes, 1 in Louisville. And then there's also a spare truck at each of those stations at all times, since they're 45, 50 miles from our shop. So,
yep, that makes all the sense in the world to me.
And then Columbia County, we have 7 contracted trucks on the road all the time, and we have 4 that are spares that sit at Wheeler Road. So that's why we show 11 there. We have not included any of our trucks that run GT calls, Richmond, Columbia, Jefferson, and those are not on this list anywhere. Now they're all licensed 911 trucks, and they're all could run 911 trucks, but we didn't include those.
Okay. And that's pretty much the thing I'm trying to get at. And again, none of those numbers jumped out at me. So I guess we're still right where we're at, trying to figure out how do we get to an appropriate number.
Well, do we look at peak number that we staff and then add a percentage of reserve to that number, whether it be 50%, I don't know.
That would kind of sort of suit me, but here's the deal: if you got 60 ambulances, do you need 30 spares?
Well, this day and time, the answer to that is yes.
Then that pretty much solves our problem, with except for maybe 1 or 2 services that we're looking at. Am I misstating that?
I mean, I don't know. I just threw that out there. I mean, I would appreciate other people's input and what their thoughts are.
Courtney, this is John Smith again. To that point about spares, I mean, we have 2 trucks that we've been waiting on parts over 12 months.
Right. That's what I say. In this day and time, it's.
I get it. I was waiting. I spent 6 or 8 months waiting on the engine, and then the engine came in. It didn't work. So there we went back again. That wasn't an ambulance, but it was a fire apparatus. So I get it, and I'm not arguing one way or the other. I'm just trying to see if we can come up with some kind of consensus, so maybe I'll shut up after a while.
Well, maybe in a year, 2, 3, we could revisit the spare issue, but I agree. I think for now, we've got to really allow ourselves a pretty large cushion on spares.
Okay,
Now, what that number is, I don't know, percentage or if your county has 2 trucks, I mean, you need 2 spares. I mean, I wish I had that answer, but it's gonna have to be bigger than we would like, I think.
yeah, and the other issue that I have is, that we may have some disagreement, but I don't want to nickel and dime it to the point that we create a huge controversy with a lot of folks over something that may or may not matter a whole bunch. So what I would like to do, I think, is just go back up to the top and let's just, so has anybody got any problem with Region 1? There were some services who went down. Well, I think once we figured out Bartow County is 11, so I think it's the same. So it looks like Puckett and Catoosa dropped 1 truck. Redmond picked up 2, Floyd picked up 3. Anything there that causes any concern?
Well, for me, the fire issue with Walker Fire, that's a Pandora's box. I think we're playing with fire with that, because that means every fire department in the state now is going to start.
Well, yes and no, Huey. If Walker County Fire has a 911 zone, then it's not a standalone. Does that make sense?
Well, they own the zone, but they've got a contracted provider. Now, if they want to roll that truck under Memorial Hospital EMS, CHI, so be it. But I just don't think we can start allowing grants to go because somebody has an ambulance. Yes, they can use that ambulance if they have a disaster, but they are not the zone provider. They're the zone holder, but they are not the zone provider.
Gabby, in the past, have we gotten Katie, have we in the past gotten grant applications from both of those?
Yes, we did get one from both of those.
Okay.
Because we're just on Region 1. We go down the list, like I said, we're getting into Atlanta Fire now. And I know, in one of my counties, I got a fire department that's buying ambulances.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's put Walker County Fire in a parking lot. And let's go down Region 2. In Banks County, the fire department runs it, I take it.
Correct.
That's correct.
Any issues in Region 2?
Is there any reason why Central is listed twice for Forsyth instead of that being combined?
Well,
I don't know.
I don't either.
I do think there was something last year. Let me look back on Kelly's notes from last year. She didn't put any notes on this year, but I can look on last year's notes. But I do want to say there's something with them. I want to say one is not with Central EMS.
Is that another one similar to Walker County, Katie?
I believe so, because they called us last year.
Courtney, like I said, I do know the state no longer requires the zone holder to have an ambulance like they used to.
And that may be exactly what's going on.
If you're contracted with a provider, you as the holder are no longer required to have an ambulance like they used to require.
So Katie, mark that one, and we will have to ask that question.
Okay. Got it.
Any other questions about Region 2? Let's go down to Region 3.
Top one is an issue for me, Atlanta Fire. Again, we need to see how many they're doing for Echo at the airport.
Does anybody know that answer or know what's going on there?
I mean, somebody had commented that they thought Atlanta Fire was staffing ambulances to back up Grady because they were so short.
And I guess, and that's what I wish Kelly was here, because if they've got a zone for the fire department, then that's a moot point because they have a zone.
They have the airport, and that is their zone,
They do have a zone there.
the airport.
Okay.
But they didn't add 3 ambulances at the airport.
And I get that, but I don't know an easy way to figure out that, because if you look at, they have 7, I don't know if they staff 7.
No,
I don't know how many they staff, but again, it goes back to that point, staffing versus spare.
well, I think we're probably, that's where Kelly could help us on how many ambulances they're running at the airport. I
But-
thought it was 3. Pete, do you know?
I've always thought it was 2. Historically, it's been 2, but as Courtney said, it's irrelevant. If they have a zone, you know, they could have 10 vehicles and 8 could be spares.
The way we're
Yeah,
doing.
because you
it
start
right now,
looking
that's-
at that and go
yeah.
down,
Yeah.
go down through those numbers, that's a good many of those are not running that many trucks, staffing on a daily basis.
Well, that, when you get down to like Grady, I know they're not running 123 ambulances,
Right.
and they've added 5 more.
Wouldn't they, as they exit the counties in South Georgia, wouldn't they be pulling those resources into Atlanta? And that's probably where the count's coming from.
You know,
Probably.
that may be where the count's coming from. I ran some numbers. I just looked at Cobb, Fulton, Gwinnett, and based the number of trucks that we got on our spreadsheet versus population. Gwinnett has 1 ambulance for every 19,685 people. Cobb has 1 ambulance for every 12,153 people, and Fulton has 1 ambulance for every 6,656, and that actually didn't include the 10 from Atlanta Fire. So as far as ambulances per person, Fulton is better off than any of the other metro counties. But folks saying some kind of a formula, then, and saying some methodology of figuring out with any definitive manner of what their peak number of 911 trucks are. And quite frankly, a lot of folks are going to tell us what our peak number ought to be is this, what we can staff today is that.
Well, I mean, I don't want to get into what people's staffing is. I mean, that's on them. But we do know what our own individual staffing, if we were full staffed, how many ambulances would be running in our zone? You know what I'm saying? And that's an easy count for me. You know, now staffing, that's a whole nother issue, but I do know how many trucks I budget to run every day in each one of my zones, as I'm sure everybody does. And those are the numbers we should be working off of, and then coming up with whatever formula we all agree on how many reserves we should have to support those trucks.
And I hear what you're saying, but it all goes back to finding that number
Right.
that they have staffed at peak. Because I think everybody's talking about what's the number at peak. And then coming up with that formula for if they staff X number at peak, then what is their backup and what would we allow as a backup and still fund it? And I'll be honest with you, I don't know the answer. I don't know how to get to that number.
Courtney, I don't think that's the question that we asked the state, and the state asked the providers, because I don't remember who it was from the trauma commission that read the question we asked. I mean, the question was, how many 911 ambulances do you have? And that's, if I remember correctly, I'm paraphrasing, that's different than what is your peak staff.
Right.
It is. It is. But the state, I think, and just talking to Kelly, feels kind of uncomfortable asking that question because it becomes a self-report, more or less, on what your peak is. But we could certainly go back and change that question and ask the question, what is your peak staffing? How many ambulances do you staff at peak? And then we could just come up with a formula. And if it's 50%, then it's 50%. And from the chat, again, that gets, there's no way to, if I'm running all these ambulances and they ask me how many, I'm a 911 zone provider, how many 911 trucks I got, I think we've got to change the question and see if the state will help us get the answer. If not, then as part of their, and it really can't be part of their application, because unless we figure out the amount of money after we get all the applications in, we could do that, I suppose. We could put it as part of the application packet that they say, I got this many on peak, and peak times 50%, or peak times 1.5 is the number we'll fund. Peak times 1.5 or the number of trucks you got, whichever is less. Would that make sense?
Try that one more time, please.
Go ahead.
Well, somebody started to say something.
Yeah, Courtney, this is Pete. I stopped because someone started to say something, so I backed off. But I think your 1.5, your peak number plus 50% of that number for spares, backups, whatever you want to call them, is more than equitable. I mean, in better times, if you recall, years ago, it was like 20%, but with the ability to get parts and labor, I think 50% is not almost having 2 for every 1 that you have to put on the road is not, or 5 for 10 is not stretching it too far.
So, okay, let's can keep that in mind, and let's walk down through the rest of the spreadsheet. And at some point in time, we're either going to have to make a motion, discuss it and pass it, or we're going to have to just leave it as it is. Does that make sense? I guess.
So
Yes, sir.
Let's go down to Region 4.
Grady would be one we need to highlight as well. So there we go.
Do what now? Huey,
Thank
was that you?
Yeah, she did it. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. Any other besides Grady that rings your bell there on 3? Okay, let's go to 4 then. Nothing particularly unusual there.
Courtney, this is Scott, Region 4, and I mean, I see the same thing everybody else is talking about, such as Spalding with 11. I know they only run like 4. Meriwether runs 3 or 4, and they got 11 listed. So I think the same issue everybody else is seeing is just the number of spares.
And again, the 1.5 might not be the answer, might be 1.6, might be 2.0, depending on, you know, what they were saying about parts and this kind of stuff. But I had to put something out there. I do have some problems with trying to figure out what's going to go on in Baldwin. Does anybody know what's happening there?
Courtney, they have placed, the commissioners have placed requests for RFP. They met last week, if I'm not mistaken, and they determined they had some irregularities in their process. And they were supposed to put it back out for proposals with a closing date of this Friday, this week, for them to make a decision. But it's my understanding that Grady will be exiting Baldwin County before the end of the year.
Okay.
And they are looking for a contract provider to provide the service while the county has the zone.
So do we need to leave a placeholder there for Baldwin, or is that something we walk away from, or what's your thoughts there?
I think you ought to leave a placeholder. I don't think it'll be any more than what Grady has put there.
Well, whatever the bottom line is, if we come up with a number before they sign the contract, then that will be the number. So I think now it actually jumped into Region 5. I apologize. Anything on Region 4? So let's jump down to Region 5. Kind of a big region, isn't it? Anything that rings your bell there?
Hey, Courtney, this is Huey.
Okay.
So aren't these grants retrospective? We're asking people to submit invoices for money they spent.
Yeah, they spend it after we give them the grant. And they have not been given a grant at this point, Huey.
Okay, I was just thinking that we're asking for invoices that we've already purchased as proof that we used the money. If that's the case, then Grady and Baldwin would get it anyway because they're still there. But if it's not, it's moving forward, then that's a moot point.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we have not awarded grants at this point.
okay.
Yeah, we do ask for some proof of what they're spending the money on though, Courtney.
Yeah,
So
but
yeah,
that's part of the grant application, is it not?
yeah. And in some cases we pay the supplier directly in a few cases, but yeah, so I mean it is more of kind of like a reimbursement grant.
Yeah, but it's reimbursement after we give them the grant. Huey's point was that Grady EMS, if they pull out, they will still be eligible for this grant for Baldwin County. And my point is that once we send out the grants and award a grant, then the money spent from there forward would be reimbursed. Did I lose you?
No, I'm not arguing for it. I'm just questioning it and understanding the process.
Okay. All right. So we got, Grady's left a couple of shops in Region 5, but Hancock, I think, is running theirs now. I guess they've down to 2 trucks.
Yeah, the county took it back over and they began, I believe, September 1st.
Okay. Okay, any questions there? Let's go down to 6. So the big change there in Region 6, and that's my neck of the woods, was when Go Cross moved out of Richmond and Central moved in, there was a decrease in number of requested trucks by 29. Everything else is fairly stable. The Go Cross did ramp up in Columbia County. I think they actually had, and I think they were trying to get back up to where they're supposed to be there.
In where?
In Go Cross has also got Columbia County.
Okay.
Hey, Courtney, our contract, our newly negotiated contract with Columbia County went from 6 trucks to 7.
Yeah. Any other questions there? All right, moving right along. I guess Muskogee County is the big issue, big surprise there. I mean, it looks like, if I'm reading it right, EMS Care dropped 11, and then I guess Mid Georgia Holdings is that, I guess that's community now, dropped 9. Alan, good to have you on. Am I reading that right, folks?
You're reading it correctly.
Boy, that ought to be interesting down there, drop 18 trucks.
Well,
Okay.
were they just doing some of the zone for Columbus? Is that right?
Yeah, both of those at one point, both of those entities had ambulances in the Columbus fire stations. I don't know what's happened there, but Columbus Fire and Emergency Services has not ramped up any that I can see, and the other 2 private providers have significantly dropped their work there. Anybody got any clues on that? Okay, Region 8. I don't see any real significant stuff there. Again, the Grady situation, depending on when the grant application is actually awarded, would depend on who gets the money there.
Yeah, I haven't heard who got the contract, if Grady kept it or if one of the other services that put in for Cook County got it. I haven't heard the verdict on that yet. So I don't know who will be holding that one.
Okay. So that's actually in progress now.
Yes, sir. I think they had a meeting last Monday with the commission on it. So I don't know who got it. I know there was about 4 that put in for it.
Okay.
Hey, I'm sorry, where was that?
Cook County.
Cook, okay, thank you.
Any questions there? So let's go down to 9. Another big area.
There's nothing earth shattering for Region 9.
Okay. Any questions? Let's scoot on down to 10. There's another one where there's a county fire and EMS has 9. Is that this? And there's a note there. Katie, it says Seabarrow County. So is that, I guess, Berry County Fire and EMS has been taken over by Northeast Georgia. Is that what's
Yeah,
going on?
correct. Yeah, the county's contracting with Northeast Georgia to run their EMS for them.
Okay, so those zeroed out, and okay, but I'm looking at it. Well, I'm looking at it now. I got on that far right hand column, got a 0 and a -9. That's going to come up to -9 for Barrow County. Am I reading that right? Shouldn't that -9 on Northeast Georgia be a +9?
Do they just have 9 total? That would be my question to ask Kelly is it just 9 total for Barrow County?
Yes.
Okay,
So my understanding is, and I actually have a council meeting this afternoon, I'll clarify. My understanding is Barrow County has contracted with Northeast Georgia to run the EMS system, but Barrow County is going to continue to receive the grant money on their behalf.
okay.
So Barrow County is going to file for the grant themselves?
Yes.
Okay.
So Northeast Georgia should not be getting any for that 911 contract because Barrow County is going to get it on their behalf.
So probably the Northeast Georgia line ought to have the 0 and the Barrow County Fire should have the 9.
That's what it looks like, yes.
Okay, all right. Okay,
But like I said, we have a meeting at 2 today and I'll get clarification on that and I'll let Katie know.
okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. So if my memory is correct, and oftentimes it's not, we got 2 items on the agenda, and that deals with going back to the concept with the Walker County Fire, and I'm not picking on Walker County, but that was one of the ones we discussed. And so we had that and the concept of a formula for determining the number of trucks.
Courtney, this is Scott Roberts, Region 4. Can you hear me?
I can.
I got a proposal, and maybe not going to do it for this year, but can't we just get with the state and say, how many trucks from each provider, the documented 911 run in the Genesis system? I mean, that would cover, if the trucks are backup or once they run at peak, that would be captured in those reports.
And what would we do with that number?
Well, that would be the number of documented to get the grant for.
Well, what if I made the argument that the actual number of trips is insignificant compared to time on task? So one trip for Emmanuel County, maybe 5 hours. That same there and back, that same trip for Chatham might be 30 minutes to take them to level 1 trauma center, and then, well, they probably won't get off the wall there in 30 minutes, but you see my point?
No, I'm not talking about the total number of runs. I get you with that. I'm just saying if you're having a truck that's licensed for 911 truck, then that truck, if it sits all year and doesn't run a call, so that service being provided, the grant. I'm just trying to find a way to capture the ones that are actually running the 911 calls and the ones that are just listed as licensed with the state. That's what I'm trying to think of.
Yeah, now that makes, I see what you're saying there. Yeah, and I see from Jeff there, the state allows 25%. But the 25% just means that they can have a truck without equipment on it. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. But I think that might be an interesting, Scott, I think that might be an interesting number to look at. You know, what is their actual volume of emergency calls in that given zone? And I think we can certainly ask that. I think they could probably provide that to us fairly easily. The other thing that I've looked at is how many ambulances they have per population. And if you look at that, then I think Emmanuel County is going to look really, really good because of the distance of travel and that sort of thing. So, but it'd be some interesting numbers to look at. So is there a desire to make a motion on Walker County Fire, or is there a desire for us to reach back out to Kelly and find out exactly what the situation there is?
I mean, I would make a motion, just for discussion, that the grants go to the zone provider, not the zone holder.
I'll second that.
I'd like for you to try to reword it a little bit, because to me, the zone provider and the zone holder sounds to be like the same person or the same agency. So what you're saying is the zone provider is different from the zone.
Yeah, it's just like, you know, in my scenario, in some of my contracts where the hospital actually owns the zone, they contract with me to provide the 911 service.
Yeah.
So I, as the provider, would be the one applying for the grant, not them as the zone holder.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I understand what your point is. So I got a motion and a second to fund that. If I misstated, Huey, correct me, that we fund the 911, the number of 911 provider vehicles versus the 911. No, I can't say. You say it again.
So my motion was that the grants be eligible to the zone provider, not the zone holder.
Discussion. So let me give you some. What if the county government comes back and says, hey, we're funding this thing. Why are we not eligible for the grant money?
Well, that would be between them and whoever their contracted provider is to work out. I mean, that's like Barrow County. You know, it looks like Barrow County is wanting the money instead of the group they've contracted with to provide the service.
See how that could be dicey in some of these areas. And again, might not be at all. Might be a lot of these counties don't even realize that this is going on. And I'm at the end of the day, the people who are doing the work, I get it, should get paid for it. But if I'm a county government and I'm funding somebody to provide care, then that money might be an issue to me. So. But what you are interested in saying, I think, is that if they're not designed zone 911 provider, that they not be eligible for the money.
Right. Yeah, I mean, because the money is supposed to be going for vehicle equipment grants. So if you're not providing the service, why would you be eligible for it anyway?
Oh, I don't. I'm not too much fine pointing it. I don't want to, but I do want to make sure that it's pretty clear.
Right.
So if
But let's take Walker County I'm sorry, Courtney.
No, go ahead.
This is Scott from Region 1. So looking at Walker County, let's use that as an example. Why do they have one ambulance? What is their benefit for doing that?
I don't know of any benefit.
My guess would be what we discussed a while ago was back, several years ago, the state required
Right.
the zone holder to have at least one ambulance. And they've since changed that. And I only know that because of our contract in Athens. The first several years we were in Athens, we had our license, we provided the service, but because the two hospitals are the zone holders, the state required them to physically have an ambulance. And so every year at license renewal, they had to cut a check for $1,500 for that one ambulance. Now, after some years of doing that, the state changed that and said they no longer required the zone holder to have an ambulance as long as they had a contract with someone to provide the 911 services for that zone. So this may be some stuff, same thing just below it with Central and Forsyth. I'm guessing that's the situation in Forsyth. Maybe Forsyth County thinks they're still required to have one licensed ambulance in order to be a zone holder. But the state did change that. That is no longer a requirement.
But then we go up to same in Region 1 to Bartow County, and it's the same way. They've got, I can't see it, I think they've got 2 listed, but then Metro's got Bartow County. So that's the same as Walker.
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
believe so, like Bartow County Fire, why are they keeping 2 ambulances? Is it for patient care and they're trying to do the right thing and make sure they can send an ambulance to take care of patients and do what this grant's designed to do for the betterment of trauma patients and patient care? Or are they still living by that old rule? Because to me, in my mind, that's a complete different ball game. If they're stocking that ambulance and they're trying to do the right thing and be ready to take care of trauma patients, which is what this money is intended for, then that's a different ball game than trying to live up to an old rule that doesn't exist anymore.
Courtney, this is Jeff Adams. I reached out to Chief Hamilton with Forsyth County.
Mhm.
That truck is not staffed, but it is stationed and available for a 911 response. So, that's where they're coming from. I don't know that it's the old school of thinking, but the truck is there. Now, how often it responds, we don't know. But that's the input I got from Chief Hamilton.
So that you're talking about on line 25, the Central. That
Correct.
one.
Correct.
So I guess I'm confused there, because if it's Central evidently is applying for the grant for both because it's got Central listed. So are they interested? Are they doing the grant too?
I would say yes,
Okay.
or they have in the past.
But they don't, do you know who owns the zone there?
I would say Forsyth County owns the zone and they've contracted with Central to provide to be the provider.
That's correct.
Well, I've got a motion and a second on the floor. And the motion, Huey, you restate it because I'll screw it up.
Yeah, I again, the motion that I made was that only the zone providers would be eligible or qualify for the grant, not the zone holders.
Does everybody understand that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, Katie, you can see who's online. And I'll call the question and if you will, because everybody, and well, let's just go down and if you call the roll and vote yes or no.
I can go down the line based on the list I have in front of me. Dwayne Montgomery,
Yes.
Brian Hendricks,
Yes.
Jeff Adams,
Yes.
Jim Atkins,
Yes.
John Smith,
Yes.
Pete Quinones,
Abstain.
Scott Stevens,
No.
Alan Owens, Alan. I'm not sure.
He was having some connectivity issues. Gabby, you can skip him for the moment.
Okay. Vic Drawdy,
Yay.
Lee Oliver,
No.
Scott Roberts, I think.
Yes.
Did I miss anybody? My list moved as people started unmuting.
Well, you missed me.
Oh no, Courtney.
And I would vote no.
So what's the result of that, Gabby? Because we had several no's and one abstained, and then we don't have an Allen's vote.
Does my vote matter since I made the motion?
Sure it does.
Or does that
Hey.
automatically, yes?
Courtney, I'm back on. We're working on our fiber optics, so I'm going in and out on my phone, but I was a yes. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thanks, Alan.
So Gabby, how'd that come out?
I was so busy on the list that I did not write it down, but I'm trying to have one abstain and then going through the no's. Maybe it would be easier if the no's, if you could raise your hand on the Zoom call.
I don't know if they're all on their computer, but I think if you're not, if you can just say your no vote.
I was a no.
I was a no as well.
Courtney, Lee,
Scott Stevens is a no.
Stevens.
So I don't know the exact count right at the moment, but it looks like the motion passed. So in the efforts of time, let's go back to that concept of a formula.
can I just ask you for clarification for us, which services then does that take out, or do we need to confirm that with Kelly? It seems like
I think we'll need to confirm that with Kelly. Because in all honesty, I think we could pick several, but again, I don't know. We ready to move on? Did I lose y'all?
Oh, we
We can
can't
hear you
hear
real
your
soft.
your volume's going low.
Mm.
I don't know if you're away from your mic or.
I'll see if I can get closer to the microphone. Is that better?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, I apologize. I do that a lot. Katie, will you go down, or Gabby, whoever's working the screen, and go down to look at some of the region, maybe 7 or 8 areas? So I'm trying to figure out a number for a again, that might not be something you're interested in, and if you're not, then I'm perfectly fine to walk away from it. But if we let's pick on Taylor County. So they got 4 trucks. They probably staff 2. And if we made the formula 1.5, then we'd only fund 3 of them. So I would be interested in if we do a formula, it'd be peak times 2. But then that might put us right back where we're at with some of the larger services. So I don't know. So y'all, somebody tell me where I'm wrong.
I don't think you're wrong. I think we just have to be careful that we don't penalize the larger ambulance services for having to have more spares than what say I would have. I run 6 trucks, I have 9. So I'm zoned for 9 911 trucks, and that's what I get my grant money off of. And I purchase equipment to put on all 9 of those trucks. I think the problem comes in is where you have 911 ambulances. A zone provider has a 911 ambulance that has no equipment on it whatsoever. Maybe that's where but you have to go off
You have to have that truck.
honor system. You have to trust that I'm giving you that right information, that I do have 9 trucks, that they've all been checked off by the state, and they're all ready to run a 911 call. But I think we have to be careful comparing, a 2 ambulance service with us, comparing us with Chatham, So.
Yeah, I absolutely don't disagree. I'm just trying to figure out if we're going to do it, what is the number?
Courtney, let me ask you this. I've mentioned I had a council meeting today. Would it make sense for us as representatives for each region that during the region council meeting, we ask our providers what their peak truck volume is?
Sure.
Because people would be less likely to exaggerate in front of a room of people that work around them. You know what I'm saying?
I think that's more than reasonable. But we're trying to get this grant done and out for a couple of reasons. One, we'd like to get it done. The other thing is that later in the year it becomes really, really busy for Katie, I know. But and it may be that we send out ask the state to send out an email, what's your peak? If we know what their peak volume is, and then we figure that number, again, I don't want to be chinchy with folks. I want to be equitable across the board as best we can.
Courtney, I have a question. This is Katie.
Okay.
What is the difference between staffed and peak?
Same thing, other
Same
than,
thing, okay.
that's not exactly the same thing. Staffed at peak hours, like if you're during the day when you're really, really busy, you may staff 12. That would be peak. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, you may back off to 10 or 9 or something. They're both staffed ambulances, but peak is the time of the day when you have the most vehicles and the most demand and the most need.
Okay, so we want to ask them their peak ambulances.
Yeah, peak staff, the number of staff ambulances at peak times.
Okay.
I say that right, Pete?
Yes, sir.
Hey, Courtney, it does take Kelly like, you know, weeks to compile this list. And I know it seems simple to go back and ask the, you know, number of staff to peak. I mean, I do think that's going to take some time. It seems like we go through this exercise, you know, almost yearly in the 4 years that I've been here. And it seems like we need to, you know, maybe be intentional about what the future, you know, formula looks like for this, and have like a work group getting together almost as this grant is deploying to figure out what it looks like in the future. And to, I don't know if it was Scott who made the point about, you know, maybe there's tiers of like how many reserves you fund for if you have, you know, 1 to 5 ambulances, 6 to 10, 11 to whatever, you know, I mean, we have so many like sophisticated formulas for so many other things we can do. Like this is doable, you know, we can do it. We just need to get a, you know, effort with the right people in the room to kind of, you know, toss around some ideas. And then, you know, Katie's pretty masterful with a spreadsheet, you know, we can figure out how to get all this stuff ahead of time. But it just, you know, we've put out so much messaging so we could get this grant wrapped up before we get into the holidays and legislative session, and then ultimately budget season, so that this wasn't overlapping with that. I guess my point is I'm not really sure we're going to distill down to that number. And then I would assume you would want to review that again and maybe have a call so that everybody was kind of clear on it. And what happens if there are variances that show, I don't see it as being as cut and clean. So I just want to make sure we come away with this with, you know, what the next steps are going to be.
So one of the things I think might be interesting, Liz, and I get your point, because I don't know that we'll ever get to where we need to be, because every ambulance service is a little different. And, you know, quite frankly, you know, manual F5 trucks, all 5 of them are equipped the same way. Some have 3 trucks that are equipped, and if one breaks down, they move the equipment to one of their spares. And it's perfectly a legitimate way to do business. I'm not griping about that. But it is a little different. And should they be funded the same? I don't actually know. I think personally, right off the top of my head, yeah. But what I would love to do is have a spreadsheet that says peak, and then we can plug in different formulas. You know, we can just plug in on that on the side, say multiply it times 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, whatever, to come up with an equitable number. I think that would give us a lot better idea of what's going on. I truly believe the vast majority of them is not going to be. I kind of think we're working around 1 or 2 services, that all of this is being circled around Grady and maybe 1 or 2 others, that we just see a lot of trucks there, and we just question about, are they, you know, where they're at. So how much time do you think it would take for us to find out about peak? You know, Huey, you think in your regions you can make the calls and find out? Did I lose you again?
No, sorry, I was muted. No, I was saying, I mean, it's easy for me, Courtney, because I have a meeting today. I mean, I'll know by 5 o'clock this afternoon what the peak number is for everybody in Region 10, but that's not the case, obviously, for everybody else on this call. So you know, how long it takes people to gather that information, I don't know. And again, we're just doing, you know, it's basically the honor system of hoping everybody will be honest.
And I agree. But also I take Liz's point well versed. I mean, sometimes we either got to come up with something that we all can feel comfortable with, or accept the fact that we can't be comfortable, or find another way to spend the money. That's 3 different options.
I think we can get you guys to a point to where we can have some way to work this out. And we have even talked amongst our group about the application could include the affidavit. It could be almost a two-part application process, whereby you have to sign an affidavit about your peak staffed numbers, and then you will know. And then you have that verification from the person from the service versus someone who goes to the meeting. I mean, I certainly trust Huey with his regional colleagues to figure that out. But, you know, Kelly does take a lot of time to verify these counts, and nothing's sent out that doesn't, you know, go in front of the submitting services eyes before it gets sent to us. So, you know, and on some level, we need some, you know, validated numbers. So unfortunately, this is where we are for now, but I think we can work on that for the future grant cycles. But we're going to need an engaged group of people who want to get together and do that.
So what I'm hearing you say, and if I'm hearing what I think I'm hearing, I like, is that we could send out an application that essentially says, you know, you're applying for a grant for peak number of ambulances, give us your peak number, and sign this affidavit said that is your peak number.
Yeah, and I think maybe there needs to be a little bit more of explanation. I mean, you know, some people may think peak number is, oh, we've got 40 ambulances out in the back. You know, I think we need to identify what peak is, not just how many licenses you have, but how many ambulances are you running? The most ambulances that you're staffing at any given time.
Well, we could ask
That are
for,
dedicated to the 911 zone.
To cover your zone.
yeah,
correct?
we could ask for total number of ambulances, total peak staffed, and then, you know, reserve, or what, we could ask whatever you want to know, really. I mean, if they want the money, they have to fill in the information, if that makes sense. And then instead of worrying about all this, you know, getting these counts and doing it this way, we could get it all. And we, you know, that's a little bit more onerous for us, but I think it may drill down onto what you're actually looking for. And then because you all on this call have so much experience on the application, we can include in there, you know, examples of what that includes so that it's crystal clear what we're asking for, as clear as it can be. And then the good news is at least we have these numbers. So when they declare their peak, their total, their peak staffed, and then their reserve, you can kind of see the differences and where it all shakes out. Obviously, you know, not for this round, but, you know, that is one suggested methodology for the future.
So I missed something there. And so can we, maybe I missed everything there, but can we send out something to them and say, and get their peak numbers this year?
I think it's going to be a little too, the grant is set to roll out October 1st. I don't think we can, the two-part application process that we have just kind of, you know, worked back and forth on was for future state of how to drill down to that number that you want. Unfortunately, you know, we're sitting here, you know, like 10 days before the grant rolls out, and we're having the same questions we've had before. So no, that doesn't fix the current grant.
So just a comment, since the grants have not been sent out, can we just add that as a question to this year's, and then we'd have a kind of a straw poll for the next year going forward? Include that in request information as part of the grant application.
That's a great idea.
I have them occasionally.
Nice. Somebody had a protein bowl this morning.
Well, I guess my frustration is we're kicking the can down the road again. And that's a bit frustrating to me. So where we're at right at the moment is the only thing we've changed here today is the concept that if you don't have a zone, or we get back to the Walker County thing, they would not be able to apply for the grant as Walker County. Is that the thing that we've accomplished today? Do I need to get closer?
No, Courtney, I think that's what we've established today.
Wow. So I'm gonna I want to know how many peak ambulances each service has on the 911 zone. How do we accomplish that?
Well, I think, is that not what Lee just suggested? Maybe adding that to this year's grant application. Is how many licensed ambulances do you have? How many of those are staffed at peak periods? And how many are in reserve? And then you'll have all that information coming back in with your grant application.
All right. Well, then this is what I want to do. Lee, Huey, and Brian, y'all work up that wording in that application. And it needs to require an affidavit that they sign off and have somebody notarize their signature that that's what they've got. Anybody object to that?
Are you saying to do that to fund for, because when the grant goes out, so this is where I think maybe I wasn't clear that when the grant application goes out, it includes the amount per ambulance. So that's why determining the number before the application goes out is critical.
You threw me off a while ago when you talked like we could do it in 2 phases, send out an application that says, here's what we want to do. How many ambulances are you going to apply for? And at that point, we could have gotten peak and all of that. And then once we got that back in, we could do that number.
That is for future grants, because this one hits October 1st.
Okay, I get that. I get that. So now what I'm assigning is a committee of 3, who I just mentioned, to put that wording into this year's document. So as part of the application, when they apply, that information we will have. Can we do that?
Yeah, and then we would use that data for next year's grant. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna let Katie, and I've been texting in the background, Katie, what, because the amount per ambulance, I think, is the one thing that kind of holds us up. But since we're already over on time, I just want her to go ahead and articulate what her kind of proposal is to the group, and if it is feasible for this year or not.
Okay, so we sent out a date that it would be October 1st through the 31st, but if we extend that, I think it would be possible. I mean, we don't know because we haven't done it yet, but if we send out the first page of the application and we ask them for their peak number, we get all those applications in, we would have to maybe shorten that deadline, maybe a couple of weeks to get that first page of applications back. And then we could do the count from there. And then they send in their affidavit with the total that they got awarded. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me, yes.
I think we want an affidavit though on their numbers that they're claiming for total peak staffed and reserve. Is that right?
That's correct.
Correct. Okay.
Courtney, could you share the total amount that's eligible for distribution?
I could not, but Katie can, I think.
Yes, let me get you the exact total.
while Katie's pulling that up, I think, and Pete, Lee, I don't know if, I think it's helpful to ask for that reserve number, because then, you know, they're not gonna potentially claim, I mean, everybody feasibly has some level of reserve. So they're not gonna claim every single ambulance, or it will be kind of a thing that we're looking for distribution in all the three categories. Does that seem reasonable?
It does, and I think this, let that group look at a definition of what is reserved, because, you know, you'll have peak ambulances, you'll have stocked ambulances, and you may have reserve. And I don't know that we need to know all of those numbers, but it might be helpful to know them, but I don't know that I think, to me, getting back to what have you got on peak, and then we need to staff that. I mean, certainly need to fund that. And obviously we need to fund peak plus a certain amount. And I don't know what that amount is right at the moment.
Yeah, just for discussion, I would think the question is try to keep it simple. What is your peak? And then this group determines what is the acceptable 50, 75% times 2, whatever it is that's above peak.
I agree.
You mean for the, but I think at least if you have some data on what they're calling reserve, it helps you figure out what that kind of ratio might be. We can talk about, we can hash these things out on we'll have to get a separate call with the folks you identified, Courtney, to get this.
So is there anything else that we want to speak to today? Thank you.
I have one question, Courtney. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Just for clarification, that amount of money, that 1.15 million that is going to be distributed, it remains the same whether there's 1,000 ambulances or 500 ambulances documented, correct?
That is correct. We'll take that 1.1 and divide it by the number of ambulances that we determined to fund.
Maybe we should go for the easiest way to.
I'm sorry?
Maybe we should go with the easiest way of counting and coming up with a number. If the end result is the same, it may not really matter to count spares, but that's for your committee to decide.
Yeah, I think that's committee's not going to decide that. They're just deciding the wording to ask the question, and then we can get together. Once if we look at this thing and column G says peak number, then we can have column the next column H and figure out. We can plug in 1.5 and see what that turns out to, bases against what they've got, to try to make it as equitable as we can. I don't know, because every ambulance service has got a different area and they've got different stresses on them. I'm trying to I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but I certainly would like to get the baby clean.
Pete, you meant the total amount available for grant is still the same regardless of how many ambulances, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and to your point, so your point is so valid, and it's one that Huey and I were talking about right before the call, is that even if we put a peak number in there, and so in essence, almost everybody's number maybe goes down a little bit, you know, that just means more per ambulance if overall counts down. So in a way, it'd be interesting to see, but distribution may look very similar.
Indeed, we may have spent all this time to not make but a few dollars difference on anybody. So, but it is a good discussion, because people will ask, and I'd like for us to be able to tell them that we're trying to get it as fair and equitable as we can.
The other thing that we could potentially do is similar to what we do with other grants, is we can have a year of audit where we go in and look at that equipment's been placed in service, and that there's some validation of, you know, once you ask the question of peak staffed or whatever, we can have a third-party audit. And that, you know, third-party audits are always well received by the legislators, because they like to see that you're actually holding people accountable for the money they get. So we could have more discussion on that if there's interested in auditing this 1 year.
And I put the total in the chat. I didn't know if you all saw it. It's 1.123.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions? I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. If you're in favor, there's a little button on the bottom right that says leave. If you'll click that. Y'all have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.